Live from London, this is BBC News. The Israeli military carries out a targeted raid, sending tanks into Gaza to prepare for future operations. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says more than 7,000 people have been killed there. The UN agencies on the ground warn again about the consequences of running out of fuel.
There's 1,000 patients who are supposed to be receiving dialysis treatment, 130 premature babies who are in incubators, and patients who are in intensive care. And of course, all of them rely on electricity or fuel in order to be able to receive their health care.
The number of hostages being held by Hamas is now said to be 224. Families talk of the agonies of the last 3 weeks.
You're sitting in your home like you did nothing to no one, and people, the worst kind of people, break into your house, take you out of your house and kidnap you.
And I'm Lise Doucette in Jerusalem as alarm grows over Gaza's intensifying humanitarian crisis. The General Assembly is meeting in New York to discuss this growing crisis.
One other headline this hour, a lockdown is extended in the US state of Maine as police hunt a gunman who's killed at least 16 people. Hello and welcome to Verified Live. The Israeli military says it has carried out a significant incursion into Gaza to attack Hamas positions overnight. It released this video showing tanks and armoured bulldozers crossing the perimeter fence. An Israeli Defence Force spokesman told the BBC soldiers carried out the tactical raid towards central Gaza to prepare the battlefield for future operations. The Israeli military says the number of people confirmed to be held hostage in Gaza has now risen to 224 and could rise further. So far, 4 hostages have been released by Hamas, which is a proscribed terror organisation by the UK and USA.
Have been ethnically cleansed 75 years ago by Israel.
Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We're coming to the end of the programme. Thank you very much for making your views known about the deepening crisis, both a humanitarian crisis, as well as, of course, the fact that the war continues to intensify. You've been watching BBC News. We can end with the live shot from Gaza, showing the skyline of Gaza City, where smoke has been rising after another aerial bombardment. We'll continue to provide special coverage from Jerusalem and across the region. But for now, it's back to you in London.
Welcome back to BBC News. I'm going to take you straight away to New York because the UN General Assembly, that gathering we were expecting, that emergency session looking at the conflict in the Middle East, the Palestinian ambassador just arrived at the microphone. So let's put that up and hear a little more.
We say, stop the bombs or both will happen. Stop the bombs and save lives, as the President of the General Assembly has indicated. All lives.
Well, they were going to come away from the UN General Assembly and the Israeli ambassador, and before that we heard from the Palestinian representative. Listening to all of that is our correspondent Neda Tawfik. And Neda, you got a sense from both the Israelis and the Palestinian before that just how polarised the situation is, even after 3 weeks of this. Well, no, we've reached the end of this section of our programme, but thanks for coming in and going through some of that. As we were just seeing the pictures earlier, another of those demonstrations happening in Tel Aviv from hostage families. We'll have more on that in the next little while. But I'm back with more of the headlines, the main developments here in just a moment or two. Don't go away. Welcome to BBC News. Let's turn to our main headlines. The Israeli military carries out a targeted raid, sending tanks into Gaza to prepare for future operations. Police in Maine in the US say at least 18 people were killed in a mass shooting in the town of Lewiston. The gunman is still at large. And the first chartered flight bringing Afghan refugees stranded in Pakistan heads to the UK after a repatriation order. One more on all of those stories here in just a moment or two, but let's round up the business news of the day. Laquessa is here, and Laquessa, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Matthew. Thank you very much. And it's great to have you with us here for a quick look at the business news. Now, we're going to start off in the United States, and the US car giant Ford has reached a tentative deal with the United Auto Workers Union. Now, this follows nearly 6 weeks of costly strike action.
Hugo Pacheco will be back with more from our correspondents in the region here on BBC News in the next little while, and more reaction from the UN as well. Now let's turn to some of the day's other stories, because a charter flight for Afghan refugees who've been stranded in Pakistan is on its way back to the UK. Thousands of people who worked with or for the British government in Afghanistan and then fled the Taliban are still waiting to be relocated in the UK. Rishi Sunak speaking a little earlier. We're going to take a break. When we're back, we'll have more from the Middle East. We'll have a range of our correspondents reporting on the programme. We'll also be live in New York at that UN General Assembly. We're still to hear from the Americans. But all of that is after weather, and that's with Elizabeth Rossini.
Hello there. Well, it's been a very wet October for some of us, not for all of us, but and into Sunday, so staying very unsettled.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The Israeli military carries out a targeted raid, sending tanks into Gaza to prepare for future operations. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says more than 7,000 people have now been killed there, as UN agencies on the ground warn again about the consequences of running out of fuel. One other headline, a lockdown is extended in the US state of Maine as police hunt a gunman who's killed at least 18 people. Hello and welcome to Verified Live. The situation in Gaza is growing more desperate by the hour. Humanitarian supplies are critically low, and the Hamas-controlled health ministry says more than 7,000 people have now been killed in the intense bombardment of the Gaza Strip. Almost 3,000 of them are children. Well, let me show you some of the latest pictures showing the destruction in just parts of the Gaza Strip, because these pictures that you see there on the screen are from Al Yarmouk Street. That's right in the heart of Gaza City. Nomia, thanks for that update. We'll talk to Nomia throughout the next couple of hours. We're going to take a short break. When we're back, we'll have all the latest developments from the Middle East and our other main stories. You're watching BBC News. Welcome to BBC News. Let's turn to our main headlines this half hour. The Israeli military carries out a targeted raid, sending tanks into Gaza to prepare for future operations. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says more than 7,000 people have now been killed there, as UN agencies on the ground warn again about the consequences of running out of fuel. In other news, the first charter flight of Afghan refugees stranded in Pakistan heads to the UK, days before Islamabad's deadline for illegal immigrants to leave. And ahead of a global summit on artificial intelligence, Rishi Sunak says addressing the risks of the technology should be a global priority. We'll have more on all of those stories here in a moment. First, though, let us head to the BBC Sports Centre. Lizzie is there with all today's sports headlines. Lizzie, good evening.
Good evening, Matthew. Thank you. We're starting with the Cricket World Cup because it looks like the defending champions, England, are making an early exit. They were heavily beaten by Sri Lanka today.
Well, that's almost it from today's Verified Live. I just want to show you the live pictures. Let's go back to New York and the UN General Assembly because we're expecting next at the podium the US ambassador. We've heard from the Palestinians, the Israelis through the course of the last 2 or 3 hours, and the Iranian ambassador. So we will hear from the Americans next. So that is what is happening in New York. I will also show you the pictures from the White House because we're expecting in the next little while. Doesn't look very imminent, but that is the White House picture. So we wait for that briefing as well. Of course, any detail on the Middle East and, of course, the shooting in Maine, where 18 people were shot in that shooting last night. And, of course, the President has spoken about that as the hunt for the gunman continues. So those a couple of the live events we're expecting here in the next hour or so. So do stay with us here on BBC News and we'll bring you the significant moments from both of those events here on BBC News in the next little while. But as I say, that's it from today's Verified Live. Thanks very much for watching and hopefully I'll see you at the next time. Bye-bye.
Hello there, good evening. Well, it's been a very wet October so far, not for all of us.